So we have these words like we use sympathy, we use empathy, we use compassion, we use mercy. A lot of times they get kind of moved around interchangeably. So I like to talk about this in three layers. One, we have sympathy, which is, poor you, I feel bad for you. It must be hard. Um, it's not necessarily weak, but it's not the strongest, right? It's almost like that Hallmark card kind of thing where it's like you feel bad for someone and you want them to know that. Empathy is when we feel the tinges of sympathy, but then we go a step further. It's like, what would it like to actually be that, or to feel like that, or to think like that? So we're trying to access the person's lived reality as much as possible, right? And remember, we're never going to be perfect because we can never understand someone else's lived reality. I work in a prison system, right? I work with primarily people of color. I've never been incarcerated, and I'm a middle-aged white man, right? But empathy can serve me very well in those contexts because we can connect with people. I may not know what it's like to be incarcerated, but I remember what it was like to be angry as a youth, right? Or there's these connective kind of tissues that we can start to find with empathy. And then when we feel empathy, that's the soil for compassion to grow in. So compassion has an active quality in it, right? So you could be talking to me and I could be filled with empathy, but you may not know that. It may not have an action to it. I may just feel the empathy. But with compassion, we feel the empathy and then we move into some sort of action. So there's a science of compassion, and it's if anyone who's interested, there's someone who works at the Greater Good Science Center in Berkeley. His name is Dacner Keltner, Dacchner, Keltner, Keltner, and he has a book about compassion. He does a lot of writing about compassion. And he breaks it down into four components. There's an awareness of suffering. There's an awareness of pain. There's an awareness of difficulty, right? So that's the first one. Then there's an emotional aspect. We're moved emotionally, right? We feel. That's the empathy starting to go to work, right? We start to feel something. Oh, heartbreak, grief, sadness, maybe gratitude, whatever it could be. Then there's an intention, and this is beautiful to connect with our tradition because there's an intentionality behind compassion, right? We're suddenly moved to try to help in some way. And then finally, the action, right? The responsiveness, right? So awareness, there's an emotional aspect, there's an intentional aspect, and then there's a response. And so Dacner Keltner talks about compassion being a hardwired instinct, right? We know it goes back to a mother hearing a child cry and wanting to feed the child or alleviate the suffering of the child. And in that way, the mother is modeling for the child what compassion is, right? And this kind of goes into developmental trauma when we don't have that enough, what that does. It points to attachment theory. It's way outside of the context of what we can get into, unfortunately, in the session. But it's an essential piece because it teaches the child how to attune to emotional states, empathy, right? Attuning to someone else's emotional state, and then also how to self-soothe when they're in that challenging emotional state. With many of us, again, due to our upbringing, not necessarily any fault of the people who brought us up, right? Because often that's how intergenerational trauma might work. But many of us don't have that ability to self-soothe, right? Sometimes it's like, I work with clients, I've never even heard that term before. It's like self-soothe, what does that mean, right? So why start with compassion in the conversation around forgiveness? Because I like to frame forgiveness as a deep act of compassion for ourselves. When presence, mindfulness, awareness meets suffering, it can transform into compassion. And that goes within our own selves as well, right? So when we recognize that there's suffering here, many of us, again, because of that lack of ability to self-soothe, I'm going to start beating myself up, right? Or judging myself more. So it's a radical shift for many of us to offer compassion for ourselves. So one way that one of our teachers talks about forgiveness, and he uses this kind of adage. He says, forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past. Forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past. So what this speaks to is, as long as our grip is in what was supposed to be, what happened, what didn't happen, what was supposed to happen, woulda, shoulda, coulda, we're still hoping that it was different, which means what? We still haven't accepted what was. It's a key aspect of living in the present moment. I've heard many people talk about this just in the share today, about time, the relationship with time. How do we reclaim time? So the key piece, and one of the key elements of compassion, to accept something, right? To accept that something happened, whether we harmed someone, whether we were harmed, whether we harmed ourselves. This does not mean to condone it. And it can be difficult not to get up in the story of it, right? Like I was talking about, what should have happened, what didn't happen, how wrong we were, right, for doing it. That's a different part of the process, but we're still arguing our case, right? There's still something in it where we're arguing our case. And hopefully there's going to come a time where we want to be free more than we want to be right. Right? That old saying, it's like, do you want to be free, or do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy? Do you want to be right? Do you want to be free? I've even heard a version of it. You want to be right? You want to be right, or you want to be married? That was always a funny one to me, right? But I think you guys get where I'm going with this, right? A lot of times we can feel like we're still arguing our case.